I suppose the key that unlocked my understanding of English grammar was when Alex Tilbury started talking about the idea of distance and separating the ideas of tense and time. And this is still something that most of my students struggle with at a conceptual level, but when they accept it, everything falls into place.
Hello, 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 hello. And welcome back to the Clark and Miller English podcast. And if this is your first time here, well, welcome. Good to have you here. Everybody is welcome. And I feel that I should probably give you a warning today because, it's a geek warning, really, because this episode of the Clark and Miller English podcast that hopefully you are about to listen to is incredibly geeky. This is real language geek stuff. It's an interview with the remarkable Christopher Walker, not to be mistaken for the Hollywood actor Christopher Walken. Christopher Walker is the author of English is a Simple Language, a really, really interesting book that gets into the deep underlying features of English and how grammar works and how the language works. And in this interview, of course, we talk about all that stuff. We ask questions like, can we get to the heart of the meaning of things like modal verbs and conditionals, and can we divide English grammar into two basic types of form? Are they subjective and objective forms? What does thinking about English grammar in different ways like this do? Does it help us? Does it help us learn English better? Does it help our students learn English better? Whether you're a teacher or a student, maybe thinking about English in different ways can be very helpful. And we explore this sort of thinking in this interview. It was a really cool interview, a bit strange because now I live in Australia and it was early in the morning for me and late at night for him. So we were in very different sort of headspaces, which was cool. It meant we were thinking in different ways. And I think that comes across in the interview. I won't talk about the details because, we're going to listen to it now. But here it is. Here's me and Christopher Walker getting geeky about English. Hey, cool, Chris. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too, Gabriel.
Yeah. Let me quickly just get an overview of who you may or may not make the podcast. It depends how well it goes. But I'll just ask you, because we ran into each other online. I think you commented on one of my, videos, blog posts, something like that.
Very likely.
Ages ago now, wasn't it? Do you remember? Yeah. I don't remember.
I don't remember exactly the moment, no. And even if I do, it's possible that I'm confusing it with another interaction.
Yeah, possible. Yeah, for sure. Basically, you made a comment on something. I can't remember exactly what it was, but, something could have, you had an insight into what I was talking about. And, we got chatting about that. And, we realized we both share a lot of geek a lot of English language teaching geekiness, I think.
Oh, absolutely.
Is that a fair comment, you reckon?
Oh, absolutely.
That's the right word?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think if you stay in the field for more than a year, you either become jaded over time, and the last thing you want to do is talk about anything teaching related. And I know a few people like that, but that's fine. They do their jobs and they're fine at what they do. Or you get out of the shallow end of the pool, you walk round to the deep end, you climb to the top of the tallest diving board you can see, and you leap out into the blue. So I think we're both more that sort of person, and it's very nice. It's very nice to meet such individuals as yourself. And it's one of the redeeming features of things like Facebook, is that there are people out there who share interests. That was the original purpose, not to send each other anti-vax conspiracy theories, but to find like-minded individuals who you can form a connection with. So it's nice that it's not finished with social media.
Yes, that's a good point. I mean, yeah, I this is off topic now, but whatever, it's cool, it's interesting. Like, yeah, I mean, do you remember in the 90s, like the whole optimistic utopian vision of the internet was that, you know, we'd all be sharing information, that we'd all be networking, we'd all be meeting people and forming stronger like alliances and groupings and things like that. And there was a lot of like
And we did. I mean,
and yeah.
I remember how much effort and energy people expended on getting onto a blog roll. So you'd have your little website set up. Maybe it was just a GeoCities account or something like that.
Mm.
You'd find other similar websites, and you'd write to the guy writing it and say, "Hey, could I add you to my blog roll? But could you add me to yours as well?" And I mean, that was
Mhm.
the big kind of like friend me sort of thing from before Facebook's time. So yeah, no,
Early social
I'm of that
media. Yeah.
generation. Yeah,
Yeah, I think I might be too. Yeah, and I think also the thing I wanted to like the thing I've been thinking about in terms of what's happened to the internet. I mean, a lot of things have gone badly that the utopian vision didn't really predict, but all the stuff that the early optimists, the early internet optimists were predicting, a lot of that is also still there. It's just difficult to see because we've got a lot of like dark stuff as well. But all those really positive things that the internet was supposed to do, it did also. It is achieving that at the moment, and that's one of the reasons we're sitting down talking to each other now.
that's very true.
Um, this is the sort of thing these guys were talking about. Yeah, I like it. Anyway, so back to back to the topic. So yeah, we're both English teachers. We're both very passionate and nerdy about our craft. I get the impression from you. I'm speaking for myself, but you're nodding, so I'm
Oh
gonna
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
with you.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so could you quickly? I barely know anything about you, so this is a great opportunity for you to introduce yourself. Just tell us who you are. What's your background?
Okay. Well, you mentioned the word nerd and nerdiness already.
Hmm.
My background is not English and not teaching. I actually hold a degree in physics.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Um,
Mm.
but I wasn't very good at it. And way back when I was doing this first degree, I took extra credits in Spanish to kind of bulk out my scores because I couldn't get the quantum mechanics stuff at all. So
Okay.
I
That
figured
stuff
that
sounds difficult.
it is pretty difficult. Yeah.
Hmm.
Ironically, the more you know about it, the less you understand. Um,
Yes.
so I was on track for a low degree classification when I discovered that you could do beginner Spanish, and I really took to the course. But what was really interesting was at the end of the course, my teacher took me to one side and said, "You know, Chris, I think English as a foreign language teaching that's going to be the career for you." And at the time, I scoffed. I was like, "No." I'm going to be a rocket scientist or go into economics or something. But she was right. Um, this this turned out to be the ideal path for me, but it took me a while to really understand that. But I do enjoy the teaching, and even after so many years, it hasn't grown stale. I do have moments where I wonder if this is really what I want to be doing, but that's usually after I've just been teaching a pre-intermediate teenage class. I think we all have thoughts like that when we teach pre-intermediate teenagers.
Yes. Yeah. Not there, not the ideal student profile.
Not
Um,
necessarily. I mean, a lot of it
mm,
depends on the background. If it's a group of pre-intermediate teenagers who simply had never had the opportunity to study English, then you might find willing candidates there. But what
mhm,
generally
mhm.
happens is that they've had English forced upon them for so long that they
Yeah.
have grown tired of it, and you can see it even from the first lesson. It's
Yes.
an uphill struggle.
And you can relate to it too, because in their position, you would also probably be similarly jaded as well,
Oh,
because
I'd be even more jaded because I that's their attitude is how I felt towards German lessons when I was at school. And those were school
Mhm,
lessons. Let's not forget.
mhm,
Those were the
mhm,
standard curriculum. I didn't have to go for 3 hours a week to some school on the other side of town for additional German lessons. I think I
mhm.
really would have rebelled if that was the case. So all
Yeah.
things considered, I think these students, when you get them like this, they are they're doing better than I would have done in the same set of circumstances. So
Yes.
credit where it's due.
Yes, yes. It's not fair, but it's happening.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
it's
Good that at least some of them are going for it. They're trooping
Well,
along.
that's right. And
Yeah.
sometimes it
yeah,
really is that they've just never had the chance. They didn't have, maybe they were in a school where you had a class size of 35, and you can't really learn a language when you're one of 35 students
yeah,
in a class.
yeah, of course. Yes.
Yeah, so great. And you're at IH, International House. That's where I did my CELTA. Not any of the ones in Poland, but in London. But I have a soft spot for IH as a
Oh,
result.
that's nice.
Because they got me started.
Yeah.
Cool, great. Did you ever do anything like the Delta or the TESOL or anything like that?
I've got an MA
Right.
in Applied Linguistics and TESOL with the University of Leicester, which is also where I did my physics degree.
Oh yes, we
It
did
was
talk about this a little.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was a great course. I enjoyed a lot of it, but it didn't have any kind of practical element, which is what the Delta would have given me.
Yeah.
Great. So that's why is this what brought you into like the world of let's call it grammatical philosophy for lack of a better term, because this is how we started talking. We were talking about
Yeah.
Mike Lewis and abstract
Yes.
ways of looking at grammar and the underlying patterns in grammar that
Yeah.
go way beyond what course books teach.
Well,
Yeah, I mean,
most course
this
books.
this was the
Some
sad
attempt.
irony of the course. Actually, was that I did the language awareness course that Alex Tilbury wrote for IH about 10 or 12 years ago. He wrote this course, and about 5, 6 years ago, I think it would have been, I did this course with my school. And it was the kind of eye-opening moment where it's like, oh, this is what's really going on with grammar. A lot of that was built on Michael Lewis's The English Verb. What really annoyed me was that after getting a real taste for it and thinking as an iconoclast, like, let's break it all down and build it back up again. That's what I was hoping my masters would do. But looking through the bibliography of the masters, you had a lot of the classics from the 70s and the 80s as grammar guides. And I've still got a couple that I bought secondhand, like Leach and Svartvik or whoever it is that wrote that description of English grammar. And they're so old and so kind of with the program that I don't find them useful anymore, because I kind of disagree with the way they set the stall out, especially with things like present perfect. I've come to almost loathe.
Yeah. So, I mean, going back quickly, is it Alex Pilbury?
Alex Tilbury, yeah, he's a teacher and teacher trainer. I think he does CELTAs at IH Wrocław, and I think he does some teaching in Warsaw with the British Council. I keep in touch with him when I can, but he's a busy guy. So
Okay.
So what was it about his language awareness course that gave you your first sort of like eye-opening moment there? Give us some examples. Like,
I suppose the key that unlocked my understanding of English grammar was when Alex Tilbury started talking about the idea of distance and separating the ideas of tense and time. And this is still something that most of my students struggle with at a conceptual level. But when they accept it, everything falls into place and conditionals no longer present a problem. So the funny thing is that in a language like Polish, there is a similar phenomenon that tense and time are often divorced. We can see it most simply if we say, okay, I'm in the kitchen, my wife is there, and I say, oh, I'm putting the kettle on to make a cup of tea. Will you have one as well? So that's me addressing my wife, and I use will as a modal verb in its present form. We don't go along with the whole future simple thing. We can abandon that. We use will there in its present form because there is no distance between my wife and myself in a kind of social context. Yeah. However, transport the whole situation to work. I'm in the kitchen at work and the director of studies appears and I say, good morning, director. Would you like a cup of tea as well? Notice the switch from will from will you have to would for would you like, would being the past form of the modal verb. Now, this is something that's so obvious that we just accept it without thinking, but it is worth thinking about because when there's no social distance between us, we use a present form. But when we want to show that there is a social distance between the speaker and their interlocutor, we step back a form. Hence going from will to would. But notice crucially that the time doesn't change. We're still talking about the present moment looking towards the future. It's the verb form, the tense, that changes to mark that distance. And if you can't separate time and tense, you're always going to have problems with conditionals because you meet a lot of sentences that use past verb forms but are actually talking about the present time. So that was something on the language awareness course that I was like, wow, that's incredible.
So let's analyze this a little more because it's an interesting one. Yeah, I mean, I think students often get moments of like revelation on this because I often find that most students find it easy to latch on to this idea that, for example, can you as a request is informal and could you is slightly more polite. That seems to be an easy concept for a lot of students to grasp. And this is like the tip of this iceberg, isn't it?
Sure. And I think the reason it's the tip of the iceberg is that for a lot of students, they don't think of the modal verbs as being present form and past form. They just think of can and could. It's when we see things like, what would it be like? If you had told me earlier, for example, like the students might not know necessarily what time we're talking about and how it works within a conditional construction. It's when it's not a modal verb that's involved, when it's a lexical verb that's involved, that the students start to get a little bit mixed up about tense and time, because it's quite easy in your head to separate will and would. You can treat them as if they were two modal verbs instead of one. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. And I think, again, going back to that can-could thing, it's the same sort of pattern, isn't it?
Yeah.
And if you wanted, because we're getting into Mike Lewis territory here, aren't we? We're getting into his notion of the past tense not really being about the past, but signaling distance. If you wanted, I mean, I'm just getting an idea now, just from this conversation, that if you wanted to get your students to understand this very abstract notion, and something not just abstract, but like breaking them away from what they were kind of taught and, providing them a completely different framework of reference, this could difference that they're already quite like comfortable with. Can be a good sort of gateway drug into the Mike Lewis new framework. And just a thought there.
One of the things that I'm quite pleased with for myself is that having read Michael Lewis and having read or at least studied Alex Tilbury's work with all these discussions of distance, I'm quite pleased with myself for at least going a little like half step further, as in when you look at, I mean, it's a long time since I read Michael Lewis, I have to admit, but when I looked back through my notes for the language awareness course, Tilbury talks about how you might step back because of time, which is the first situation, like today I'm doing this, yesterday I was doing this. You might step back because of politeness, and you might step back because of...
Let's go for an example for each one. So
the time one, this is the most obvious reason that we step back. So right now I'm talking to you, but an hour ago I was talking to my wife. So we're using a change in verb form to signal difference in time or distance in time from the present to the past. Politeness we've talked about. Will you have a cup of tea compared to would you like a cup of tea? So we're going from will to would. That signals politeness. And then reality, we have the paradox that comes with the fact that the present moment is unchangeable. So I would say if I had more money, I would do something like this. It's impossible to have more money than you have at the moment, My students always complain, no, it's not. You could have more money, you could go and get a job. I was like, yes, but that's in the future. Right now, in this present moment, the amount of money in my hand is static. I can't change it. It's impossible. It introduces a paradox.
This is a very physics.
It is.
This is a fresh way of looking at it. I've never seen it like this. It's almost quantum physics, isn't it?
I know. It makes me think that maybe I should have studied a bit harder back then.
Fantastic.
So we've got this.
Change this reality.
Exactly. So to show the fact that you can't change reality, but you want to talk about a changed reality, you're stepping back one verb form. To introduce distance reality. What I've done, and it's a very quick plug for my book, which is English is a Simple Language, which maybe we'll talk about or not later.
We can talk about that for sure.
Oh, thank you. But one of the things that I've done is just I tidied that system up a little bit.
Okay.
One of my big passions is looking for the core, the heart of what we're talking about. And if we talk about distance, we can both agree on time. And when there is distance in time, we can agree on that. And it's not up to us. Well, it's just not up to us. If I start talking about last year, you're not going to disagree with me about when that is. You're not going to say that's 2024 because that's 2 years in the future. When we say last year, we're going to be talking about a time in the past. So we agree about that. And it's not up to us what it is. It's not a matter of debate. If it's not a matter of debate, we can say that it is objective.
Yes.
So when we introduce a change in verb form to show a change in time, that is objective distance. We all agree on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other two,
and that's what our students also agree on as well.
Exactly. Everyone agrees on it. That's fine. So that's one form of distance. That's the objective distance that we experience through changes in time. I know it's a weird example right now, of course, because where you are, it's tomorrow.
Yes. So maybe
you
we
could
may
argue
not agree on that.
Yeah, but we agree that it is, though. We agree that from my perspective, looking at yours, it's tomorrow where you are, and for me, it's yesterday still. Won't be for much longer. But it's objective because we have clocks that measure these things, and we all agree on the calendar. Different countries might have different calendars, but we agree that those calendars are true in that country. So that's all fine.
Yes.
If we look at the other two,
time.
If we look at the other two kinds of distance, though, when we're talking about politeness depends on who you are and how you see yourself with other people, doesn't it? So I give the example of seeing Tom Cruise. For me, actually, no, that would be a better example for reality. So the best example then with the politeness would be, speaking to a friend compared to speaking to a boss. That is a relationship that really depends on a lot of things. It just so happens, actually, that my director of studies at school is an old friend. We've known each other for years. So I don't feel that sort of distance. The school owner, on the other hand, is the sort of person I see once a year. And I do feel a little bit shy speaking to her. So I tend to use more distant forms out of politeness. But it is entirely subjective.
So distance form would be using could instead of can, for example.
For example, yeah. But it is subjective. It depends on the person.
Yes.
Reality, too, is subjective. Paradoxes aside, reality is subjective. And this is where the Tom Cruise example comes in. So I was getting ahead of myself earlier. I'm unlikely to see Tom Cruise. It's very unlikely. So if I want to talk about the idea of meeting him, I might use a past form. If I met Tom Cruise, I would ask him about when the next Top Gun film will come out, for example. And I'm using those past forms not to talk about the past, as we've already discussed. I'm using those past forms to talk about the present, looking at the future, but in a situation that I just don't think is likely. For me, it's not likely. However, if I was a member of the Church of Scientology, that might be completely different. Or if I was a member of, I don't know, the what do they call these, the people that follow celebrities around? Their entourage. There we are. If I was a member of the entourage, I'd be like, oh, I'm seeing Tom Cruise later. I suppose I'm going to ask him. Yeah, I'll ask him about the next Top Gun film. So that reality, exactly. If or when I see him, I'll do this. For
Yeah.
them, that reality is entirely subjective.
Yes, it depends on so many factors outside the language.
Exactly. So politeness and reality are both examples of subjective distance.
Yes.
So we're trimming it down. Instead of having 3 forms of distance, we now only have 2. And those 2 forms, the objective distance of time being different and the subjective distance of either politeness or reality being different, those 2 can then be used in conjunction to build the whole system of conditionals. All of the conditionals can be built from that.
Cool. So just to recap, you're taking, because going back to Lewis, who kind of started all this stuff back in the early 90s, I think 85, wasn't it? English verb. Anyway, 80s. He basically lists the types of distance in his book. So, you've got distance of time, distance of register, distance of reality, distance of... There was another one, but I can't remember what it was.
It's very likely there are others, but I think they still fall into one of these 2 umbrella terms, don't they?
Yeah, so you're sort of funneling these into kind of 2 general terms.
Yes. And I feel that it helps because...
Subjective and objective.
Exactly. Now, to kind of do a kind of a corollary of this.
Yes.
Modal verbs, and this is, I think, something else that Lewis has talked about a little bit. Modal verbs have a kind of core meaning. And from those core meanings, we get all of their secondary meanings.
Yeah.
Or tertiary meanings in some cases.
This is, let me get my head around this really briefly.
Yeah.
So you've got a core meaning. So should we take something like can?
Yes.
Okay, it's very straightforward.
I've thought a lot about can, and I think that this is... My thoughts have led me back to Lewis once again. And I think Tilbury talked about it in the language awareness course as well. Can essentially talks about freedom to act. That's the essential meaning. Now, if we look at can for ability, we're talking about your freedom to act in a physical manner. Can you swim? Yes, I can. I am free to act that way in water.
Even if it's psychological, can you speak French?
Yeah.
It's some sort of physical ability.
Yeah, it's the freedom to act via speaking French. But if a student puts their hand up and say, can I go to the toilet? They're not asking about their freedom to act physically. They're asking for their freedom to act socially. Despite
what your pedantic teacher may have said.
Exactly, because they're missing the point. They are missing the point, aren't they?
I don't know.
It's a funny little, it's a funny little joke. And I actually do reference that in the book because it is a funny joke. It's a standard amongst teachers, but it misses the point because
let's mention the joke very quickly, just for anyone who doesn't know it. It's like,
for the one person living under a rock, a student puts their hand up and says, "Excuse me, teacher, can I go to the toilet?" And the teacher looks at them and says, "I don't know. Can you?"
Nice.
And watches.
To
see what happens.
And looks a little smug in the process.
Exactly. And then they go on to a discussion of the difference between can I and may I, which again it misses the point because that's not really how language works. That's the whole descriptivist. It's the descriptivist versus prescriptivist.
It's a classic example of that.
Isn't it? But what the student is asking for is freedom to act, but not physically, not literally, but metaphorically or socially. Now, if you were to teach all of the different ways that can is used or applied, the students would have a fairly long list of meanings that they'd have to learn. And I've seen this just in the last week, actually, teaching from Ready for Advanced, where we had a little kind of modal review section. And there was like a box full of different examples of the way that it can be used. So we've got can here for request, deduction, criticism, inability, theoretical possibility, and prohibition. Which is a fairly intimidating list of possible meanings.
It's not good to give students long lists of things. They immediately go, this is difficult.
Exactly. Which is what brings me back then to Lewis. And yes, there is a long list of reasons for why we might include distance in our grammar. but they all fall under one of two umbrella terms. They are either objective forms of distance or they are subjective.
Oh, back to this. Cool. Okay, so you're taking the same framework and you can apply it to the modal.
Yes.
Interesting.
I think that everything works that way because you need to go for the heart understanding before you go for all of the kind of the filtering down.
I see what you mean when you said you try to go a bit deeper. You try to
because I think that there's value to going deeper. And the way that you can construct conditionals, if you go for the two forms of distance, objective and subjective, the way that you can form conditionals as a result becomes almost beautiful in its symmetry and its simplicity. It's a little bit like the unified field theory that scientists and physicists have been striving for the last 100 years. They want to bring together gravity and electromagnetism, everything else they can think about, and put it all into one equation.
The theory of everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, that came up. I was watching Only Connect last night. That actually came up. I don't know if you watched that show. It's fantastic.
I haven't seen it. No.
It's very good. Yeah.
Yeah. But that's basically what we're looking at.
I like this. Yeah. So because this is what Lewis was attempting. And he did a good job of sort of getting a lot of things together that no one's done before with the language.
Well, very few people. I found a book that I think was written by a guy called Close, and he tried to do something well before Lewis. In fact, do
you remember the name of the book?
Yeah, I think it was like Grammar for Teachers or something prosaic like that.
Really
I've got it on my Goodreads.
Grammar for Teachers, Close, like
RL Close, something like that.
I'll check it out. Yeah,
let me see. A teacher's grammar. Sorry, a teacher's grammar.
Teacher's grammar.
The central problems of English. It's very dry. It's not really something that you want to sit in bed reading because you'll find that you get a good night's sleep if you do. But what's interesting is that it's an old text resurrected by Lewis because Lewis provides a kind of commentary. So at the end of every chapter, he talks a bit about what Close had said. So Lewis himself was standing on the shoulders of giants.
Yeah. So this guy kind of laid the groundwork a bit. When was this published?
I think it was built on another grammar. According to the introduction, it was built on another grammar that was written in the 1890s. So all of what we're talking about has its antecedents. And I think that, if our field was taken seriously enough, maybe it is already, and I don't know about it, but you could do a nice kind of almost a history or even a historiography of English grammar and the way that it's being treated. And you'll see, I think, that there are two kind of fields within it. You've got the people who have come to accept that there is a future simple form and who think present perfect works one way. And then you've got others who say, well, actually, those descriptions are not fit for purpose. And we need to really look at how language is used and the meaning that's conveyed in different situations.
Yes, that would bring us to our test questions. But I want to ask you a few questions because in this conversation, you've brought up like so many interesting points. One thing in particular, actually, was I just really like the way that you sort of apply a sort of your background in physics is obviously influencing.
I think,
the way you're being able to look at these frameworks. Yeah, and I just wanted to know. I actually recorded a podcast ages ago, but I didn't publish it because, frankly, I felt I came across really terribly in it, and I was too embarrassed to publish it. But the topic was interesting, and it was about the future, and it's about whether the future exists or not.
Oh, that's a good topic.
Yeah, and I've had my own sort of revelations in this area because there's no future tense obviously in English. This is the first point.
Or to clarify, what we might want to say there is that there is no one unique way of expressing the future, and at the same time there is no one way of expressing the future that can't also be used to express another time. That's kind of the crucial thing here.
That's it. And one thing I noticed was that, generally speaking, if you want to make your future more certain, you make it more present-y. Okay, so if you're will is quite a vague sort of it can feel quite vague if you're talking about intentions or plans or even predictions, right? Because will probably is often collocated, and you have a sort of modality. It's a modal verb after all.
Yeah.
So
if I could interject very quickly here,
go on.
One of those eye openers, the kind of eureka moments that I have with my students, is I ask them, where does the word modal come from? It's an adjective, but it's derived from another word. And I ask them, so which word is it that it comes from?
I don't know. Let me think about this. I'm thinking modern. I'm thinking moderate.
No.
Moderation. It's going to be a surprise, isn't it?
It is. It's mood.
Ah, really?
Yeah.
That makes sense, because you get Halliday and that's another kettle of fish.
So if these words all correspond to your mood, are the moods of two people ever completely the same?
Mm-hmm.
Even if two people say they are happy, are they both equally happy and happy in the same way? No, they're not.
It's so subjective.
It is so subjective, which is why, that's the explanation for what you're saying. When we say things with will, there is that sense that it's more to do with feeling, and it is. That's by definition. Modal verbs are all in some way subjective, maybe very slightly subjective to completely subjective, but they include a hint of subjectivity.
And Lewis covers this. His whole thing about modals is but going back to sort of talking about the future, will's like the first thing students think about. But you want to make it more certain. You bring it closer to the sort of present. You say going to make it a little more certain. But present continuous. I know I'm broad strokes here, and it's not always the case, but generally speaking, and then present continuous sort of feels a little more certain and organized.
Yeah.
And the closer you come
most
to the
certain would be present simple, because present simple, if you could travel back in time, I've often thought about building a time machine just so I can travel back in time to the day on which the present simple tense or verb form was named, so that I could slap a bit of sense into the person doing it. I'm like, stop. We almost never use it as a present form, okay? It's the present form grammatically, but it's not present, and it's hardly simple.
But only because someone named it.
Yeah.
Present. Simple. That's all there is.
Grammatically, it's the present form, but as we know, time and tense are not the same. So if it's the present form of something, it doesn't mean it's the present time. So present simple is an accurate name for it, but it's just not very helpful. But you're absolutely right. If you say to your friend, yes, don't worry, I know we're meeting at the cafe soon, and I will leave in like 10 minutes. The friend can take that with a pinch of salt, depending on how well they know you. But if the friend then says, okay, that's fine, but please remember, the bus leaves at 10 past, there's no subjectivity there. That is a purely objective rendering of the truth. And that's the most objective, because it is present simple. It's a statement of fact, nothing else.
It's immutable. I sometimes call it God's tense. It's absolutely unbreakable. I've got a YouTube video on that when I'm chatting with a student and trying to explain it to them. It's like omnipresent. It's universal. It's timeless.
Timeless is exactly it.
It's outside time.
Yes.
Okay, we could talk about this stuff for ages, but I wanted to move on a little bit to the we originally planned on having a sort of let me go back another step. Tests and quizzes and
tasks,
basically and tasks even even classroom exercises. Often, and I think any teachers listening are going to find this really a very familiar situation, that you're going through some answers of some exercises or quizzes or whatever with your students, and you find that when there are 3 options available and you're supposed to only have one as the correct answer, you find that 2 or even all 3 are totally usable. But the most interesting thing about that is that depending on which answer you do give, you have a completely different picture in your head as to what is happening in the conversation. And that's partly because these exercises and test questions are completely contextless. They're completely out of context, which is a big problem, obviously. But it also gives a very valuable insight to this underlying like framework or pattern of the language, because it really lays bare how this stuff works. When you see that the wrong answer is possible, and then you ask the question, why is that possible? What's the situation where people are going to be using this? And you can really see how this stuff works. So I think badly designed tests and exercises are actually a great learning opportunity.
And can I start with one that most teachers will be very familiar with?
Yeah,
and again, plug for the book because it's in here. I remember when I was applying for my CELTA and I did the telephone interview and they did the kind of rudimentary grammar question things. One of them was the classroom is hot and you want the window to be opened. Which of these three sentences would be most appropriate for the student to say if they're going to offer to open the window? A, I'll open the window. B, I'm going to open the window. C, I'm opening the window. Yeah. Now, when you're applying for the CELTA, you're expected to then say, well, I'll open the window is the right option, because the prevailing wisdom is that will is used to talk about a decision made at the moment of speaking, whereas be going to is used to talk about a decision made before the moment of speaking, which is a nice kind of explanation, except that it doesn't really hold water, because
no one speaks like that.
No one speaks like that. No one thinks like that. And that's not what these things mean either. It's an explanation after the fact. So one of the things that I do in the book is I look at those three options and I say, okay, since we've decontextualized so much, what could we do by adding context but not changing the grammar to make the other options also correct?
Yeah. That's so fun. And it's so much more constructive.
It is.
Choosing A, B, or C.
Yeah. So to complete the picture here with this example, the obvious one, I'll open the window, is because a student has announced themselves with certainty. I'll open the window, therefore saving you, other students, the trouble of opening the window. That's really what they mean. It's not about a momentary decision. The next one, I thought, okay, maybe the teacher has the back to the classroom because he's writing up on the whiteboard or something, and he's like, oh, it's so hot in here. One of the students has already gotten up to go and open the window, and they're a little bit aggrieved by this. It's like, I'm going to open the window. Because, of course, in a text-based test, there's no pronunciation element anyway, so you don't get that kind of like feeling.
Where so much meaning exists.
Exactly. Yeah. What do they say about communication? It's like 3% what you say, and the rest is how you say it. And then the last option, I'm opening the window. What if the teacher was blind? The students just happily, very helpfully, teacher, I'm standing up. I'm approaching the window now, and I'm opening the window. Okay, teacher, that's the noise you can hear, okay? I'm not leaving or anything. So the teacher's blind. The student is just being kind and explaining what they're doing. So there you go. Hey, presto, all three of them are possible if only there was the context for them.
Yes, and talking about this is a much healthier way of looking at language than telling students. Because, these tests and these exercises, multiple choices, gap fills, what message are they sending to the student? They're sending a message that language is mathematical, technical, learnable through looking at charts and tables, and not a matter of communication, or at least communication is a sort of secondary element to it, which it isn't. It's the primary
they say
element.
Something else as well, actually. Because if you have a teacher who likes to look at the difference according to context, and then you have a test where there is no context and you don't have the chance to explain it, what the test is telling the student is, we are so desperate to put a number against your name, we're going to take away the opportunity for you to explain yourself, and we're going to penalize creativity simply for convenience. Now, if we had infinite money and infinite time, we would sit you down and this would be an oral test where you go through and you explain what you think is happening in each sentence. We grade accordingly, but nobody can afford that either because of money for teacher salaries or time or both. So we're going to make a test that isn't quite fit for purpose, but it's fit enough because it's going to give us a number. And your parents expect to see a number, and the school expects to give you a number 3 or 4 times a year, and that's good enough for us.
And that is basically more important to us than your ability to speak English.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's the implication.
It is at least
there,
kind of
it?
gratifying a little bit that when you actually sit a Cambridge exam, be it first, advanced, or proficiency, I've yet to see a question in an exam that was so open to interpretation. They are well-designed exams, in my experience.
Yes. Cambridge and Oxford. My partner does. She's worked on some, I think, Oxford projects for creating test questions, and her brief is like 70 pages long, and it's like a Rubik's cube. You can't. It's almost impossible to create one of those questions because they don't let anything slip through.
Oh yeah,
they're so well designed. But if you look at I'm drawing my examples that we're going to look at in a minute from English File, for example, which is Pearson, I think. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Let's not name and shame publishers. But I mean, some are more rigorous than others, I think is the point that you want to make there. And how about I go through some of my favorites.
Okay.
And we can open them up and discuss the different. This is an exercise anyone can do with their students and should do with their students. I'm going to start with one. Okay, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. It's Luciana's not here today. She, brackets, not work on Mondays. So you have to choose the correct tense. Luciana's not here today. She, not work on Mondays.
Well, I think that the answer we're expected to give is she doesn't work on Mondays. But I could imagine a context where she isn't working on Mondays is a possibility. The continuous form gives us a start and a finish. It puts our action in time. So we're talking about something most likely to be temporary. So maybe she's got a problem with daycare for her child at the moment, and it's Mondays that she can't get to work, but it might change in the future. So for the time being, she's not working Mondays.
Yeah. Or I was also thinking it might be shift work, right? So people do Mondays for a couple of months and then Wednesdays for another couple of months. Yeah. All possible. And a lot of my students do shift work. So this is actually much more relevant to them.
The really important thing, though, is that if they give an answer that's not the one that's supplied, if they can't explain why, then we shouldn't trust that they're making a choice. It could just be a mistake.
Or
we can't give
even.
Or a guess that's just an errant guess. We can't go, oh yes, that's also correct, unless they actually explain it. And these sort of things come up in my classes a lot. If the student can't explain it to me, it suggests that they've not made a choice and they're just wrong. They haven't completed learning the core idea of the grammar point. Yes.
I mean, all good teachers try to get inside their students' heads and figure out what's going on there. Yeah, this is key in whatever you're doing, whether it's this or anything else. Yeah, I agree with you there. You have to know that they got there. What would a physicist have to do? Show their work.
Show your working.
Show the process, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay, so that's one. I'm going to give you one of my favorites just because it's a vocab one, but because I used to live in Istanbul, and this one's about Istanbul, so I like this one. Istanbul is an old city with lots of blank buildings, and the options are... I'll read the sentence with each option. Istanbul is an old city with lots of modern buildings. Istanbul is an old city with lots of interesting buildings. Istanbul is an old city with lots of noisy buildings. All of these are true. I've lived in Istanbul. Some buildings get very noisy. It's a noisy city.
Yes. I think it would be a rare writer who would collocate noisy and buildings, but you could make an argument for it. Was this
and
one
all of these are possible, aren't they?
Yeah. How many answers are given as correct in that case? Is it one or two?
I think you're only supposed to get one.
Right. So, I mean, what we've got here is a little bit of, what would it be called? Cultural hegemony?
Yes.
Because they're basically thinking, it's an old city, they can't have modern things there.
There's a little bit of sort of bias, coming out
I
there,
mean, New
isn't
York
there?
is an old city, but it's full of modern buildings.
And Istanbul has lots of modern
Oh, it does.
buildings.
It does.
It's almost patronizing to assume that it
It's
doesn't.
absolutely patronizing. Yeah. It's like we're the West. We can have modern buildings in old cities. Look at London with the Shard.
Yes.
But you can't
Yes.
because you're Turkey. Haha.
Yeah,
So yeah,
just
there's a
mosques and
lot to
palaces in
unpack there,
Turkey.
isn't there?
Yeah,
There is a
actually, the
lot.
more we think about
Yeah.
it, yeah, some serious bias going on.
Yeah.
What was the other one I quite liked? Touching on cultural things here. This one's definitely very culturally specific. Harry either has to or doesn't have to. Harry has to go to bed early, he's very young. Harry doesn't have to go to bed early, he's very young.
Wow.
What the? Yeah, right? One of my students, because we kind of marked it wrong when we did the test, one of my students called me out on it and said, like, but he doesn't, if he's very young, he doesn't have to go to school.
Yeah.
So he doesn't have to wake up
I mean, you
early,
can
so he
get
doesn't have to
you
go
can
to
get
bed
into the
early.
whole idea of the obligation implied by have to. If you are so young that you don't have freedom of choice, is there any sense applying obligation to your life patterns? I mean, if you've got a baby in your arms and you look at the baby and say, you know what, you're getting a bit fat, you need to eat a better diet, and the baby's like, you're the one feeding me.
Right, yeah. Yeah, because this is a good point. Have to doesn't even apply to very young children because this sort of institutional obligation, which is what have to is essentially expressing, doesn't apply.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting.
It is a very tricky one for course book writers, especially at lower levels. I mean, it doesn't get much easier as you go up and you have more and more possible right answers. So it must be really difficult to design a course book that would satisfy on every front at C1 or C2 level. But I mean, you think about the enormous flexibility in one action interrupted by another action. And this is a staple of all kind of B1 plus books or A2 plus books. You know, the phone rang when I was having a shower, for example.
Okay.
That sort of thing. And you have to identify which is the long action and which is the short action. And then the students start saying, but teacher, that's not really a short action, is it? I mean, if the phone rings but you don't answer it, that's quite long.
Yeah, you can get into the relative length of the action, and
but I don't.
One is shorter than the other. It's not the way it works.
No, exactly. But this is what's so beautiful about kind of getting really to the heart of grammar is that you don't need to talk about relative lengths because then that's just another layer of complexity for the student.
Yeah.
The way I talk about it with my students now is complete. And the problem I've got is that it's not really supported by any of the course books. There's no kind of grammar guide in the course book that labels it or describes it the same way, which makes it difficult. But what I tell students is that if you look at a simple form, we're only interested in the truth of the action. That's all. When it happens, how long it takes, none of that matters. We are only interested in the truth of the action. And as you said earlier, it exists outside of time.
It's a naked verb.
Exactly. When we look at a continuous form, though, we're taking it and putting it in time. And by putting it in time, it's going to have a start and a finish. And that's classic Lewis. And if it has a start and a finish, it gives us a space in time in which another action can sit. We can move that kind of point into here somehow. But you have to decide which one is going to be which. Which one are you just interested in the truth? And which one do you want to feel for the action going on? And I use a little metaphor here. And I talk to my students about the mind and the body. Like the mind you have or even the soul, if you prefer it, if you're a more kind of spiritual bent. When we think about the soul, where is the soul? Where does it reside? Well, that's not the point. The point is that it's supposed to be true. You have a soul. You can't label the body and say, well, that's where the soul is. It's just, it exists. Where? Who knows? The body, however, the corporeal body, has something to it.
Physical
It has
makeup, yes.
physicality. It has a beginning, usually the toes, and an end, the head, or the other way around.
Yes.
It depends on your perspective.
Which song you're singing.
You can touch the body. You can feel it. You can't feel the soul.
Quantify it. Yeah.
Exactly. You can't feel the soul. So if we're talking about an action where we're not trying to feel it, we just appreciate that it exists, then we go for a simple form. But if we want to feel the action, we use the continuous. This is how I show the difference between present perfect simple and present perfect continuous. If somebody says, why are you sweaty? And you say, well, I've exercised all day. You're just talking about the truth of the action. But if someone says, why are you sweaty and out of breath? And you say, oh, I've been exercising all day. The choice of the continuous form gives that verb a body that you can kind of manhandle a little bit and feel. And you're like, oh, yeah, I can feel why you're sweaty and out of breath and so tired.
You can feel it more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Going into sort of slightly different territory, but I think we could probably apply the same filter, ing and to, especially when we're looking at things where both are possible. You know, he likes to have a drink on a Friday, and he likes drinking on a Friday. You know, you ask sort of, I use this term reluctantly, native speaker of English, who isn't a teacher, who doesn't think about things like teachers do, and say, what's the difference? They are going to be bugged by that all day. They're going to be thinking, and they can never really get to it because it's so abstract. But this is the same sort of thing. One is kind of corporeal and one is abstract. One is like the soul, one is the body.
Possibly. I had this discussion just this last week, actually, with one of my colleagues at work, because she was asking me which are the verbs that require an ing form straight after the main verb, like with keep.
Yep.
You know, you keep doing something. You can't say keep to do. You have to say keep doing. And I said, I don't know. I don't know the list of verbs. I don't know which verbs need that. But can't you figure it out from first principles? And she's like, well, what do you mean figure it out from first principles? And I said, well, substitute something else for the complement of the verb. What else can you keep? I mean, you can keep a pet, right? She's like, yeah, you can keep a pet. It's like, okay. So, well, a pet is a noun. It was a noun phrase. So that comes after keep, a noun or a noun phrase. Well, if it's a verb that we're using, what will we change the verb to so that it fits as a noun? Well, we'd use the gerund. That's the ing form of the verb. So if you keep doing something, then you keep a noun just as you would do keep a dog or keep a cat. So it follows as a pattern. To, we see as well in directions. I want to go from here to, I don't know, Warsaw, for example. So Warsaw is my destination and I'm going in that direction.
Directional.
You can consider it the same way with verbs. I like to drink. So you see yourself moving towards the action. I like drinking. You're thinking of the noun itself. Now, in most contexts, there's going to be almost no difference between I like drinking and I like to drink. But if you change the verb to stop, there's a very big difference. You can stop a noun, and that means preventing the noun. But you can stop to, and then you're moving to the direction of that verb. So, for example, I stopped to smoke means you stopped some other action to move to the direction of the action smoke. Whereas I stopped smoking. Smoking is the noun for the thing that you do. Like you could say, oh, I stopped the lift. I mean, that still fits the complement, and it has the same effective meaning. So as a system, I feel like it works.
It does work. I mean, you do have things like, you know, need, for example, or even want would have a noun. You know, I need a cup of tea. But you could also you wouldn't have I need drinking a cup of tea.
No, but that's the same with like, isn't it? So it depends. But what we're looking at here is not so much grammar, but lexis, really, isn't it? Because need, you satisfy a need, and you find that you have need as a noun as well. But need lexically suggests that it will be satisfied by an action or by a thing. I need something, or I need to go somewhere or to do something. But that won't be true of every verb. Some verbs will only be satisfied by one or the other of those. Or the way that they're satisfied by one or the other will determine the meaning of the verb.
Yes, yes. So this is first principles again.
Exactly.
Yeah, going back to it. And probing. Probing is
Exactly.
a good way of figuring this out. Okay, good. We got deep with that one. A couple, I know, I'm aware that it's getting late where you are, but I want to throw two more examples at you. Just
Please.
because for these tests, we looked, so far, everything we've been discussing has been in sort of standard English. And we've been discussing sort of standard English examples. Another thing that these tests and the sort of shoddiness of the design of some of them can reveal is sort of colloquialisms and spoken grammar and, casual language. So I've got a few examples here. Yeah. So the task is to choose a gerund or infinitive, as we were just discussing, actually, interestingly. And it isn't easy, brackets, learn Chinese. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, they want you to say it isn't easy to learn Chinese.
Yeah.
But how common is it isn't easy learning Chinese? Incredibly common.
Yeah.
Yes.
Different meaning. Very subtly different meaning.
Yeah, there's a subtly different meaning. One is there's a sort of sequentiality. Is that even a word?
It can be. Why not?
Sequence. Let's make it a word.
Yes.
A sequentiality is definitely not a word. Of the two, isn't there? Like you have a sort of one thought followed by another thought. It isn't easy to learn Chinese.
Effectively, yeah, you could look at it that way.
But it isn't easy learning Chinese. Sort of, they're both kind of there mingling together at the same.
They are. I would say that this is an example of where our knowledge of existence and of life comes to bear on the meaning that is imparted. If you say it isn't easy to learn Chinese, you either know that because you've tried, or you know that because somebody told you, or you read it somewhere. Chinese isn't easy to learn. It isn't easy learning Chinese suggests that you are either making the attempt or you have in the past, but you have some sort of first-hand experience. It suggests that. But I feel that it suggests that not so much because of the grammar, but because of what we bring to the context. We know that when we've tried things that aren't easy, we describe that thing that isn't easy by way of a noun, rather than the general application of a directed verb.
I'm thinking again also about your body and soul thing here. I think it somewhat applies here as well.
Oh, yeah.
It isn't easy to learn Chinese, feels detached from the body or from the reality or whatever.
It's the same for everybody.
Yeah, it's very, very objective. It isn't easy learning Chinese, like you said. It's like your present perfect. I've been working out all day. You can feel the pain.
Oh, absolutely.
The suffering of learning Chinese.
Or when I put my back out and I have to bend down to do up my laces, it isn't easy doing up my laces right now. That's what I would prefer to say because it's my body is the one defeating me. I'm not talking generally. One finds that it is not easy to complete the section. No, that's too.
Right. Yeah, you wouldn't say it isn't easy to bend down right now. Yeah, absolutely. Great. And okay, one more. I really want to see if we can squeeze colloquialisms into here. But maybe everything does simply fall into these categories. It is. Just give me a second. Yeah. Okay. Jack dances blank than Francis. Jack dances not as bad than Francis. Jack dances less bad than Francis. Jack dances worse than Francis. Now, I don't think this is colloquialisms now I'm reading it, but because there is a difference in meaning here. It's not so much a meaning, but a difference in emphasis, right? If you want to say Jack dances worse than Francis, it's quite a neutral sentence, but if you say Jack dances less bad than Francis, it's like you've been comparing a bit more earlier.
Yeah. You know what this reminds me of? And it's interesting, really, because here it's like, here are two options, and the course book thinks one of them is wrong or one of them is right. And then the very same course book, I almost guarantee it, the same course book will teach you the difference between few and a few. And it's the same situation. If you say, I have few apples, then you're starting a low number and you're thinking negatively. But if you say, I have a few apples, you're at the same low number, but you are subjectively positive about it.
Yeah.
And what we see is the same phenomenon in your example sentence. So it's really interesting that one thing here is prioritized in the course book. This is something we're going to teach, whereas the same sort of thing in a different context. Okay, no, that's wrong. This is right. And it's not a teachable
decide that it's there is a
so you
nuance.
have these poor students wondering why we say few and a few, and then they finally become convinced that there is a difference, and then they meet the same idea, the same concept in a different context, and the teacher says, actually no, that one's wrong, and the student goes, oh, why?
You said yeah, absolutely. So it's just a matter of being optimistic or not,
Yeah. So it's a bit of subjectivity.
Yeah, Jack's pretty bad at dancing, but he is less bad than Francis.
Yeah,
so you're being nice to Jack.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I know that the conceived wisdom would be to say he isn't as bad as Jack, but less bad. Yeah, I would use that.
Put it in a corpus, you'll find it.
Absolutely.
People say this.
Absolutely.
People do say this. Yeah. And it's you're marking it, you're emphasizing it a little, and perhaps even adding a little humor or whatever. And all
absolutely.
The
Absolutely.
That language is fun.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
Enjoyable to use. Yeah. Cool. Great. Okay, that's a good one to finish with. It's less bad than the others. And let's move on to talking about your book. So I haven't read your book, unfortunately, but you know what? I'm going to. So it's the impression I'm getting so far is that it's I will enjoy reading it in the same way that I enjoyed reading the English verb.
Yeah.
Because
you'll notice a lot of similarities, and I'm not saying that I've plagiarized Lewis or anything, but I cover a lot of the same ground because I feel that you need to cover that ground to get to the next step. And I feel that the next step is the Holy Grail, which is the ultimate simple understanding of conditionals.
Yes, and this is a big question I want to ask you. So you're focusing on a conditional specifically here.
Well, that's one of the chapters, and the chapters that lead up to it certainly do that. One of the other things is that I'm convinced that present perfect is not taught well, and it's not introduced properly in a lot of course books. It's quite a simple thing to fix, but how many times have you heard a course book describe present perfect as a past action that has a present consequence? It's like that all the time, yeah? But what if there is no what if there's no present consequence? What if there was no past action? I mean, how do you explain negatives in present perfect? If you say I haven't been to China, there was no past action. So how could that still follow
nothing
the rule?
To hold on to there.
Exactly. It's actually quite a simple trick to fix that, and it's just a matter of rotating the idea. The present perfect is what we use in the present when we are thinking about the past.
Yes. Is the present perfect after all?
It is. But it's that choice. It's a choice. And I always tell my students it's a choice. You're in the present and you're choosing to think about the past. And when you're faced with one of these tasks that says, do you use present perfect or past simple? The answer is basically, am I choosing to look at the past, or am I just putting myself in the past? And when I explain it this way, my students tend to do a hell of a lot better in those sort of tasks. You know, it clears the fog. They suddenly go, oh, okay, so if I'm in the present, so can I say yesterday? I say, well, is it yesterday now? And they go, well, no, it's not. I go, okay, so how can it be yesterday and present perfect if the present perfect is now? They go, well, that's a good point, actually. So then immediately they get rid of the present perfect yesterday. So that's one of the things that I go into a lot of detail in the book. But yeah, it is fair to say that quite a lot is concerned with either looking for the heart of the meaning of modal verbs, and that's a big section. I did a lot of research into the etymology of modal verbs, and that turned up some interesting stuff.
Will is fascinating, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Yes, that's an old word. Yeah.
Even more fascinating to me was must.
No way. I haven't looked into that one. Okay. That's old too. You can tell because it
It
sounds
is
so
old.
German.
It is old.
Yeah.
But I'll
Yeah.
stop there because it's spoiler alert, I
It's
suppose.
a spoiler alert. Yeah, you have to get the book. English is a simple language. I want to ask you a question. So you mentioned the Holy Grail, right? Being the ultimate sort of core meaning of the conditionals. And
Yeah.
you know, with Lewis and what we're doing throughout this entire podcast episode, and sounds like also through your book, there's this sort of quest, isn't
Yes.
there? There's this sort of mission to find the underlying like meaning of aspects of the language. Now, because there are other sort of areas of linguistics that look at language in a very different way, and they see it as rather more sort of dynamic and less form driven. I'm going to ask. I don't know the answer to this question. It's what I love about language is that I think no one does. But do you think that is there something at the center there? Is there really something that has the Holy Grail? Is there really something that unlocks everything? Does it exist, or are we just peeling off layers of onion until we're left with nothing? What do you think?
Well, in the case of conditionals, there is a Holy Grail. And I think that Tilbury in the language awareness course and Lewis and everybody like that, they were basically there, but I think it was just that one little refinement of saying that there are two kinds of distance, subjective and objective. Now, generally, we think of conditionals as being either first, second, or third.
Yes.
And I feel that that number is a clue. Because if we think about like the so-called first, and I don't like these numbers because they don't tell you anything of the meaning. It's a little bit like referring to things through the Dewey system. If you start talking to somebody about your favorite books by giving them Dewey reference numbers, they're not going to learn which books you like. They're going to learn where to look for them in the library, which is fine, but it makes the conversation a little bit dull for people who don't know Dewey. But if there are three different kinds of conditionals and we've got two forms of distance, how many combinations of distance do you think we need to make? Well, it's three. We can start with
talk me through that.
So I'll walk you through it. We start with this one, no distance. No distance. We're talking about no objective distance, so we're talking about the present, and we're talking about things that are real. So if I have time tomorrow, I will watch this video again. Yeah. So that's present grammar. We've got the word tomorrow, which points to the future, but it's present grammar and it's real. It's possible for me to do that sort of thing. Now, if we introduce one form of distance to our conditionals, we're going to introduce subjective distance. And I could do the paradox thing. If I had time now, I would talk to you about active and passive voice. I don't have time, which means that talking about it is impossible. To mark that, I'm introducing subjective distance for reality, but I'm still talking about the present. So the time hasn't changed. And then the last one, I'm going to introduce first the subjective and objective. So I'm going to talk about if we had met yesterday, we would have talked about different things. We didn't meet yesterday. Which changes reality. And yesterday is in the past, so that's our objective distance.
That's where the objectivity is.
Back twice. We go from our present to our past form to the past perfect. And there we go. Now, if you were to draw these conditionals up into a table, and that's something that I do in the book as well as in some workshops that different people have run in different places, like IH Kiev, you get a beautiful picture because you've got the no distance, present for the if and the result clause. Present and present. That's all you use, present forms. For introducing subjective distance, past forms on both sides of the equation. And for introducing both forms of distance, past perfect on both sides. And then you don't have to worry about numbers because there's no first, second, third. There's no zero because zero and the first conditional are effectively the same. You can get rid of that. You don't have to worry about first conditional using will on one side because it can use any present form.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. If we meet again, let's talk about the passive.
Yeah. Or if he does that again, I'm going to kill him.
Exactly. There's no will there, is there? We've gotten rid of the will because will was treated differently in the so-called first conditional. We can get rid of it and just say, look, if there's no distance, you just use present forms as you'd expect because there's no distance.
Yeah.
Any present form, as long as it makes sense, you can use it.
Yeah.
Then when we introduce a bit of subjective distance, you're going to be using past forms. Probably a modal in the past on this side, because your feeling about this if is important. The modal verbs introduce your feelings, your mood. So you're going to use that most likely, but it's going to be a past form. And then if we're going to talk about the past, we're going to introduce both kinds of distance, the objective and the subjective. We're going to have past perfect on both sides. And again, probably a modal in the past perfect on one side because you feel it. But then if you want to talk about a past condition with a present result, you just need to go across and then up.
That's the thing, isn't it? Mixing is quite fluid.
Exactly, because it becomes, instead of a table of rules, it becomes a schematic. It becomes a kind of almost like a menu of options. What would you like to say? Not what are you allowed to say, but what would you like to express? And to express it, just kind of navigate this little table.
Through that table.
Yeah.
If you could send me a copy of that table for the video of this, we'll have that up. So when you're describing it, and
perfect. Have I sent you a copy of the book?
You have not. That's just why I haven't read it. I don't think so, unless I missed. I was in the middle of an international move when we were talking. So
that's true. That is true.
Yeah,
I'll have a look. I've got a PDF that I can send to you. So yeah, it's a little table up there.
Fantastic. Yeah, we'll put that up when we're when it's on video form. So you don't believe that it's an onion, that language is an onion. You believe that there's stuff at the core of the features, sort of. I don't want to use the word dictating, but sort of affecting, or there's a word but I'm missing it. Deciding what's how they're used and what
the metaphor
what we're
of
expressing.
I think the metaphor of the onion doesn't quite serve the purpose that we want it to here, because if we go back to what we said earlier about the modal verbs, that they have this central meaning and then other meanings that kind of stem from that central meaning. An onion doesn't really work.
Oh, that's what I'm saying, though. I think
it doesn't cut it, does it?
Nice.
So you want something that emanates out from a center.
Oh yeah, that's what I'm suggesting. That it isn't an onion. It isn't
that's
something
right.
that you peel away and then it just disappears
course.
because there's nothing in the middle. You feel that there is something in the middle somewhere.
Yeah.
That can be explained and described.
Yeah, we could think about a lot of the language that we use as being a little bit like a small tree. That the trunk is the central meaning, and we probably find the central meaning in most contexts, but the secondary meanings that branch off literally they branch off will be related to that central meaning. They're not going to be completely divorced from it, and if they look like they're divorced from it, then it's worth closer inspection, and we might find actually there is something there is a connection.
And I guess, I mean, we don't have time to get into it, but this is all subjective to change as well, because language changes.
As we saw with may and might.
As a tree may.
May and might, over time, because they look so similar, they don't have that kind of built-in difference like will and would. They look similar. The idea of subjective and objective distance as it applies to may and might has kind of gone out the window a little bit, because I mean, we kind of use them interchangeably. We don't think of might as being a more polite or more distant version of may. And it's just the way that history's worked and usage has worked.
Yes. And I find anything that teaches students to analyze the difference is probably sending them off on the wrong track these days. But language changes.
Language does.
That's that. One more question. I should know the answer to this, but I think I don't. Are you blogging? Are you writing your ideas down anywhere, or is there anywhere where we can kind of keep up to date with your thoughts?
Yeah, I have.
Many of them.
I wouldn't call it a blog, but I do have a kind of central repository, which is closellyobserved.com.
Closellyobserved.com. Closely observed, all one word.
That's right. Just like my email address and just like my Instagram, my Facebook, my YouTube, it's all under the name Closely Observed. I think it's fitting. Yeah, and
as a teacher, especially.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't blog these days. I used to. I much prefer to write for an audience, because usually when you write for an audience, your work will go through the hands of an editor, and that editor will get his red pen out, and that is an opportunity for growth, because I like my writing. I think my writing is good, but often when I send it to an editor, it comes back with a whole host of corrections or potential changes, and I look at it and go, actually, do you know what? That's a lot better than what I had originally.
Yeah. Oh, that process is good. Yeah. Working with other people makes your work better, always.
It does.
Yeah. Great. Well, I'm looking forward to checking all that out. And have you got any questions or any comments or...
No, none spring to mind, actually. I think
it's past midnight now, isn't it?
We're on the same day.
Yes. We're finally on, it's Saturday. Yeah.
It's objective reality.
Objective reality has finally reached us as we end the conversation. Well, thanks, Chris. It's been a real pleasure, and a deeper geek out than I was expecting, and I was expecting quite a geek out. So I'm really pleased that we got to go so deep on this.
It's been fun, hasn't it? Yes.
Yeah. Well, stay in touch, and I'll keep up to date with your things, and I'm going to read your book.
Oh, fantastic! Thank you. I'll send you a copy.
Oh, lovely. Thanks so much, Chris. Well, sleep well, and enjoy the rest of your Saturday.
Thank you very much. Yes, likewise.
Cheers,
all
mate.
the best.
Cool. Thanks a lot. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.